members of Parliament, support staff, radio listeners, TV viewers, all following this meeting via social media, members of the media, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this Central Committee meeting for today. This is Central Committee meeting number 16 for today, Friday, February the 13th, 2026. At this time, I want to give a special word of welcome to the Minister of Finance, Ms. Marinka Gums, and her support staff here today. We have established a quorum of, I'll give you the exact amount right now, of 8 members, and I invite you to stand for a moment of silence. Thank you. I have several notifications that we have received regarding this meeting. Absence, so notifications of absence from the members Myers, De Weaver, Kotai, Irian, and Lewis. Notices of lateness from the members Peterson, MP Roseberg is here, and MP Duran, the next one, for a notice of lateness. I'm looking at the screen for the members who wish to make a notification, and I see that MP Otley wishes to do so. I give MP Otley the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good day to the Honorable Minister of Finance, your support staff. Madam Chair, I actually have 2 notifications. I have one on behalf of a lot of small companies that have contracts with the government that have not been paid. There are companies that have reached out to me and said they have not been paid for upward of 3 to 4 months. And some departments are telling them they are waiting on the 2026 budget. So can we confirm if this is true, and what is the update as it pertains to payment of cleaning companies, security companies, and so forth that has contracts with the government? I know certain payments are going out, so I would hope that we are not neglecting the small companies and only paying the big vendors. Next, Madam Chair, as it pertains to GEBE, I saw in the news lately that the Minister of TEAT is set to submit a tariff structure proposal to GEBE within 30 days. My question would be to the Minister, why now? We have been screaming, you have the authority and power, Minister of TEAT, through you, Madam Chair, since October 2024. However, better late than never, but what I would have liked to see is the Minister of TEAT submitting tariff structure to GEBE, not a proposal. The Minister has the authority to adjust and create tariff structures. So I do not want a back and forth like we have been having for the past year and a half, Madam Chair. Thank you very much.
Thank you, MP Otley. I continue, and I give the floor to MP Lacruz. MP Lacruz, you have the floor.
A blessed afternoon, Madam Chair, Lady Griffier, Honorable Minister of Finance, her support staff, my fellow colleagues in Parliament. Madam Chair, Lady, it would be unright of my person to not mention my day yesterday. Madam Chair, Lady, there's an organization on the front side, SXM Nini, that is extremely active dealing with persons born on St. Martin and having no nationality or no documentation. Madam Chair, Lady, a very emotional morning and a great part of the afternoon I spent yesterday seeing the situation that a lot of our own are going through. Madam Chair, Lady, I want to once again commend all those who have taken it upon themselves to present legislation dealing with this problem, especially the leader of the United People's Party, MP Otley, and know that there is more to come. Madam Chair, Lady, to the Minister of Labor, I am requesting that he does a proper check, especially in casinos, where a lot are being abused, not being paid right, contracts not being extended, home for 2-3 months, and then back on the job, paying minimum wage, not even registering at SZV. Madam Chair Lady, to the Minister of Labor, please, please, please. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you, MP La Cruz. I don't see any other member wishing to make a notification or two, so we can continue with the agenda point for this meeting. The agenda point for this meeting this afternoon is de Ontwerplandsverordening houdende de intrekking van enkele landsverordeningen op het terrein van de belastingen die in onbruik zijn geraakt. De zogenaamde Landsverordening belastinghervorming fase 1. This draft national ordinance is number 186 of this parliamentary year in the records of Parliament, and it is IS 225, dated October the 24th of last year in the records of Parliament. It would be in English, the draft national ordinance retracting certain national tax ordinances that are not applied in practice. Going over to the agenda point, I mentioned that it was on October the 24th of last year that Parliament received the draft national ordinance retracting certain national tax ordinances that are not applied in practice, National Ordinance on Tax Reform, Phase 1, so-called. At this time, I therefore would like to give the floor to the Minister of Finance, Ms. Marinka Gums, for some opening remarks on the topic and a presentation. Minister Gums, you have the floor.
Honorable Chair Lady, honorable members of Parliament, Griffier, esteemed support staff, radio and social media viewers, residents of our beloved island, ladies and gentlemen, all under the sound of my voice, a pleasant good afternoon and blessed day to all. Today, Madam Chair, is Friday the 13th, and I can assure you that I am not superstitious. To the contrary, my faith in the Almighty is unshakable, and therefore I am humbled and honored to present this legislation today to Parliament, which could be considered a watershed in our continuing efforts to protect our patrimony and affirm our heritage. In fact, it could not have come at a more promising time, as we are in the middle of celebrating the 100th anniversary of Black History Month, an event Dr. Carter Woodson established a century ago as Black History Week to avoid the erasure of our history. What we are here today to do is certainly concerns our history, culture, heritage, and identity as a people. The proposed new legislation seeks to abolish both the inheritance tax and the land tax. Both laws have been on the books for more than half a century. However, they were never enforced. We will see why, Madam Chair, as I go further into my presentation. However, Madam Chair, the following is the present state of affairs. The land tax is an annual levy on the value of both unimproved and improved land with a structure on it. The current tax rate is 0.3% of the property's value and is charged to the owner. Technically, this would affect all succession land on the island. As for the inheritance tax, certainly, Madam Chair, this is supposed to be levied on assets and money that a person inherits from a deceased individual. However, the practice thus far has been not to enforce it. Formally abolishing it would remove any legal doubts about St. Martin's position as a favorable location for estate planning and wealth transfer, in particular with respect to real estate, since there will be no longer be an inheritance tax on property passed down to heirs. Let me state up front, Madam Chair, that abolishing these taxes would not affect other taxes which are associated with real estate transactions, such as the transfer tax, a one-time tax of 4% levied on the transfer of real estate upon purchase, or the long lease land fees charged if a property is on land leased from government. Having established that, Madam Chair, it is obvious that land is fundamental in the building of a nation. It is not just an economic driver. It is a cultural and spiritual symbol of our very existence as a people. Madam Chair, from the days of the evil system of chattel slavery, which, by the way, has been called a crime against humanity, when our ancestors were forced to toil this soil under the most dehumanizing and demeaning conditions, up to our modern day, with the descendants of those same enslaved ancestors inheriting what we have come to describe as succession land. Our people have had a deep connection to this land which transcends history. In fact, our history of resistance to oppression and exploitation continued past the shameful slavery period to our resolute and determined refusal to implement the land tax ordinance that has been on the books for generations. It is therefore my considered opinion that it is high time to make that resistance final and remove this anti-cultural, anti-social, and anti-St. Martin people law from our books. Land, as we all know, is a finite commodity. It is not a limitless resource. It would be an understatement to say that in St. Martin, land is very scarce. God has endowed us with a very small amount of land. Our ancestors understood this so well that they devised a system of succession land which kept land within our traditional families. In fact, land ownership is a distinguishing feature of the average St. Martin family when compared to our brothers and sisters in the rest of the region. However, owning land, especially succession land, does not automatically translate into being cash rich. In St. Martin, the land tax isn't just a fiscal line item. It is a relic of colonial imposition that our local leadership has successfully resisted for decades. By repealing this law, we are not only cleaning up our legislative books, but are also honoring the legacy of those like the legendary Democratic Party leader, Dr. Claude Watty, who fought tooth and nail against the implementation of this law on our island. What is happening in Bonaire today with regards to their land tax and its impact on the real estate market there makes repealing this law here on St. Martin even more urgent. So for those who might ask, why now? I believe the answer should be, if not now, then when? The situation in Bonaire, which has repeatedly reached a boiling point with locals feeling pushed out of their land, should serve as a cautionary tale. Besides, as Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. would say, the time is always right to do what is right. For too long, our tax system has been a patchwork of colonial-era relics that often penalize the very behaviors we wish to encourage: the accumulation of family wealth, the development of our land, and the long-term investment in our soil. Today, as Parliament considers the approval of this legislation to abolish the land tax and the inheritance tax, I would like to urge the honorable members, through you, Madam Chair, to understand that they are not only passing another law, but actually participating in making history, because this measure signals a transformative shift in our national fiscal policy. Our goal is simple: to make St. Martin the most competitive, investor-friendly, and family-oriented jurisdiction in the Caribbean. We are moving from a system of taxing what you own to a system that incentivizes what you build. I therefore stand before you today, Madam Chair, to perform a duty that is both fiscal and deeply symbolic. We are here to bring our written laws into alignment with the lived reality and the existential soul of the St. Martin people. For decades, certain taxes have sat on our books like uninvited guests, relics of a centralized administration in Curacao from the days of the now defunct Netherlands Antilles. Today, the government moves to permanently repeal the land tax ordinance and formally abolish the inheritance tax. The legacy of resistance, the land tax. Permit me, Madam Chair, to focus first on the land tax. While it has technically been on the books since the mid-20th century, it has never been implemented on this island. Why? Because the political leadership of St. Martin, most notably the late legendary leader of the Democratic Party, Dr. Claude Watty, refused to let it happen. Dr. Watty understood a fundamental truth about our people. Land is not just an asset, it is our identity. He fought vehemently against the implementation of this tax because he knew it would eventually force local families off their ancestral property. He viewed it as a colonial tool that penalized the land-rich but cash-poor St. Martiner. By formally repealing this ordinance today, I can guarantee Parliament, through you, Madam Chair, that we will not be losing revenue because we have never collected it. Instead, we will be providing legal certainty by removing this loaded gun that has been pointed at the heads of landowners for years. In so doing, Madam Chair, no future administration will be able to simply activate this tax to plug a budget hole or be pressured into implementing it because someone somewhere who does not identify with our culture issues an instruction to do so. In addition, Madam Chair, we would be honoring our history by codifying the long-standing principle that all our politicians share, regardless of party color, that a person's home and land should be a sanctuary, not a source of perpetual debt to government. Abolishing the inheritance tax. While the land tax has been successfully resisted up till now, the inheritance tax has remained a burden. In my humble view, Madam Chair, this tax is a penalty on the very virtues we wish to encourage. In other words, thrift, hard work, and the desire to leave something for our children. The case for total abolition. Madam Chair, abolishing this tax will mean we would be ending the grief tax. I am sure we will all agree that it is fundamentally unjust to demand a percentage of a family's holdings at the moment of their greatest loss. Similarly, Madam Chair, we would be protecting local wealth. In our culture, wealth is often tied up in family business and land. Inheritance taxes often force heirs to sell their assets to pay taxes, breaking the cycle of intergenerational wealth that is vital for our middle class. Moreover, Madam Chair, we would be enacting or enhancing our regional competitiveness as we look to attract investment and encourage our diaspora to return to a zero inheritance tax environment, which will make St. Martin an attractive premier destination for regional capital. Fiscal realism. Critics of this legislation may ask why we are removing these instruments from the government's tool shed. My answer, Madam Chair, is simple. Our fiscal future does not lie in taxing possession, but in taxing economic activity. Efficiency. This legislation enables the tax office to direct its efforts toward the transformation of the tax administration, including its IT systems and improving compliance, instead of allocating time and resources to inheritance-related cases involving individual families. Growth. By guaranteeing that land will never be taxed, we would be providing the ultimate incentive for long-term development. We want people to build, to renovate, and to beautify this island without fear of an annual penalty. How will all of these affect government coffers? First of all, Madam Chair, Regarding the land tax, we cannot lose what we never collected. Since the land tax was never implemented, its repeal will have zero impact on our national budget. Instead, foreign investors and local entrepreneurs alike would now have the legal certainty that will enable them to plan for 10, 20, or 30 years into the future, knowing that their land will not be subjected to taxes. As there is no inheritance tax in place, this measure does not result in foregone revenue. Instead, it facilitates the timely transfer and use of assets, contributing to increased economic circulation and supporting overall economic activity. Let me explain, Madam Chair. When families are not liquidating assets to pay taxes, they will be spending that money in our local economy, fueling growth that we can capture through more efficient consumption-based taxes. To summarize, Madam Chair, with these legislative initiatives, we are saying loud and clear that we do not tax possession, we reward development. We do not tax death, we celebrate legacy. We are closing a chapter of legislative clutter and opening a new era in which we emphasize through legislative action that the land of St. Martiners belong to the people of St. Martin forever. We are indeed, Madam Chair, taking the first baby steps on the road to a comprehensive tax reform, which my ministry is busy with right now, guided by the theme stabilize, repair, reform, a phased approach to tax reform and system renewal. My focus has been to move this process forward in a structured, responsible, and realistic manner, strengthening our systems while ensuring fairness, legal certainty, and sustainable public fairness for St. Martin. Conclusion, finalizing the quiet resistance. Madam Chair, honorable members of Parliament, the formal repeal of the land tax is the completion of a journey started many decades ago. It is a promise kept to our leaders and a gift given to our youth. We are telling the world that in St. Martin, what you earn is yours to keep, and what you build is yours to pass on. We are saying that we choose a path of empowerment over extraction. We are laying these legislative ghosts to rest permanently because they do not reflect the values or the will of the St. Martin people. This legislation will ensure that the Friendly Island remains a place where family legacies are protected and land ownership is a sacred right, not a taxable privilege. In approving this law, we will not just be changing numbers, we will be protecting the very foundation of our society, the right of every St. Martiner to hold, own, and pass on their land without fear of government intervention. We, all of us, Madam Chair, government and Parliament together, would be acknowledging a fundamental truth, which Dr. Claude Watty understood very well, that the land is the only true equity our people have. He knew that for a family in Cul-de-Sac, Middle Region, Dutch Quarter, Colby, or St. Peter's, an annual land tax could eventually lead to a forced sale, stripping them of their ancestral patrimony. As for abolishing the inheritance tax, Madam Chair, we do this in recognition of the fact that this tax strikes families during their most vulnerable moments. It is fundamentally a grief tax. Doing away with this tax would help in protesting the succession land held by many St. Martin families across generations. We have to admit, Madam Chair, that inheritance taxes create legal tangle that frees development and divide families. Similarly, abolishing the inheritance tax would contribute to creating intergenerational wealth, as I am sure that we all want our youth to inherit more than just memories. We want them to inherit the equity built by their parents. Furthermore, getting rid of this tax responds to a basic principle of fairness. May I remind us, Madam Chair, that the assets being taxed at death were built with income already subjected to wage tax and turnover tax. To tax it a third time is not fiscal policy. It is a penalty on success. It is simply not fair. Madam Chair, it was Maya Angelou who famously said, if you don't like something, change it. If you can't change it, change your attitude. Those who went before us could not change them, so they changed their attitude and made sure these taxes were not implemented. Now, we are in a position to abolish them. I implore every member of Parliament to do what is right and just for the people of St. Martin. Abolish the land tax and the inheritance tax now, today, and protect the people's patrimony for prosperity. I look forward to answering any questions the honorable members of Parliament may have. I thank you for the opportunity, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister of Finance, Ms. Marinka Gums, for your introduction to the draft law to retract several antiquated laws that are on the books. Thank you for your presentation. And now the members of Parliament have the opportunity to react and ask questions. And I see that MP La Cruz wishes to do so. MP La Cruz, you have the floor.
A blessed afternoon once again, Madam Chair Lady. Madam Chair Lady, I sit here with joy, and I'll tell you why. It has been said numerous times, what for the locals? What for the locals? Madam Chair Lady, this is a prime example of a law that is being stricken off of the books that will benefit mainly the locals. Madam Chair Lady, I have a suggestion to add to this, and I've done some research concerning the sale of land in the rest of the Caribbean, and especially to foreigners, that there's a tax. For example, Antigua and Bermuda, a 7.5% stamp duty. The Bahamas, a 10%. Barbados, a 2.5%. St. Lucia, a 10%. Grenada, 5%. Even the Dominican Republic has a 3%. British Virgin Islands, a 12%. And it continues and it goes on and on. Madam Chair Lady, to the Minister, a question: do we have a sales tax on property for foreigners? And if not, why not? And would that be a revenue generating measure that we could profit from? Then, Madam Chair Lady, I once again want to thank the Minister for her presentation, clear, and I received an email with someone from the Netherlands complaining about something with land. I sent that directly to the Minister, and the Minister could answer that email or maybe reach out to that person and have a conversation when it comes to inheritance and land on St. Martin. Then, Madam Chair Lady, the government indicates that inheritance and land taxation instruments were largely dominant and generated little to no revenue. However, these instruments still represent potential fiscal policy tools that could be activated during future economic and budgetary challenges. Can the Minister explain why government chose permanent repeal instead of retaining these taxation instruments as contingencies, opinions that could preserve long-term fiscal flexibility for the country? And I had this question before the presentation, and I love the answer. Done, finished, and nobody could bring it back. Petra off. Then, Madam Chair Lady, although government indicates that the repeal has no immediate fiscal consequences, has government conducted a long-term fiscal modeling or economic scenario assessments evaluating how the removal of these taxation instruments may affect St. Martin fiscal resilience during economic downturns tourism fluctuations and unexpected revenue shortfalls. And my suggestion concerning the sales of land, adding a tax to that, would be the answer to that question. So I'm curious to know what and how the minister thinks about that, seeing that it is done everywhere else. And I hold it there. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you, MP La Cruz. I now give the floor to MP Weaver. MP Weaver, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to the griffier, honorable minister, support staff, my honorable colleagues here today in the House of Parliament, and those viewing or watching via whichever media. I do not have any questions per se to the minister. I just want to commend the minister and her team. I think it was a very clear, concise presentation, and it's something definitely has my support, you know, and it's something that I think you explained it very thorough as to why we're doing it and why it needs to be abolished and not have an opportunity to ever be implemented. And I think this is a great win for the country and the people of St. Martin. So thank you for that, Minister, and you have my support in this one. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Weaver. The next MP to speak is MP Labega. MP Labega, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to all. Good afternoon to the Minister of Finance and support staff. Very clear presentation. I totally agree. Most of the questions that I have here were clearly answered in the presentation. Even one MP La Cruz also mentioned was answered. But for the sake of reiteration, I'll just go over a few more of them. Number one, through you, Madam Chair, the Minister mentioned that the law is about providing legal certainty. Why is the formal repeal necessary if the taxes were never enforced? Question two, how does the Minister expect this legislation to impact the real estate market on St. Martin? Question number three, through you, Madam Chair, some may argue that the inherent tax promotes redistribution. Why does the Minister believe abolition is the fairer approach? Question four, through you, Madam Chair, how does abolishing these two taxes align with responsible fiscal management? Question five, can the Minister elaborate on how this reform benefits family holdings? Question six, how does this reform contribute to St. Martin's ambition to become more investor-friendly? Number seven, the Minister referred to this as a step within the broader tax reform. What is next within the total tax reform? And the final question through you, Madam Chair, to the Honorable Minister. The Minister emphasized the cultural and historical dimensions of land. Why is it important to frame this legislation in that context? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Labega. The next MP to speak is MP York. MP York, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good afternoon to yourself, griffier, Minister, support staff, honorable colleagues, and the viewing public. Minister, I'd like to start off by saying, regardless if I agree, disagree, or whatever, commend you on the fact that you brought this legislation to Parliament. I am someone that always has been saying the government is too busy with policies and not enough with laws. And now there are two laws here to be processed, whether vote for or against. And also kudos for the fact that you've stuck to your words. You said you were going to abolish these two laws from the beginning, and here you are today being consistent in doing that. Well, with that being said, Madam Chair, I find it also befitting for me to also be consistent in my opinion on the topic. It's also not foreign to the Minister, through you, Madam Chair. I totally agree with everything as presented about the inheritance tax. I'm in total agreement when it comes to that. But as it pertains to the total repeal of the land tax, I've been pretty much open and public about it. In past budget debates, the Minister and I have had healthy back and forths on the topic. And I gave my opinion to where I think at the time the Minister didn't dispel it. It was more a good point. I would look into it. And the point was basically, I think we're at the precipice where we could turn the tide as it pertains to also local ownership. We have never enforced the land tax, but it's also opportunity to where we can amend it and tweak it to where we can still get some revenues out of it, and it also empowers locals moving forward. What are the deviation for that? And I mean, if we're going to do everything consistent, why do we then skip the share in this particular instance? And if it was not skipped, the minister can correct me, but I didn't see any advice from the share when perusing the documents. So for that, I'll leave it at that for now, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, MP York. We now have MP Doran. MP Doran, you have the floor.
Good afternoon to you, Madam Chair. Thank you. Good afternoon to my colleagues, the Honorable Minister, her support staff, and a special good afternoon to the people of St. Martin that are tuned in. Madam Chair, through you to the Minister, most of the questions that I had in mind were already posed. I think that this is something that's pretty straightforward, so you won't get much, any sort of opposition on my end in regards to this, because it makes sense, and it's been a discussion for quite a while now. However, I want to bring something else to the forefront in terms of a scenario to the Minister. We often hear over the years that pensioners complain about being taxed after the pension. They talk about being double taxed. I would like to know through you, Madam Chair, if the Minister could give an explanation on that so that it will be clear to the public. I know what I've been told and what I've been made to understand, but I would like for that to be put out there. And also, what are the intentions right now with the ministry in terms of curbing that to limit their burden? Why I say this, there's a scenario with a gentleman that is 69 years old, so he's on pension. He's fortunate enough to get a taxi license. His pension is about $1,300, for instance, in total with his multiple pensions. Let's say from the taxi income, he brings in about $1,500 a month, and then he has 2 one-bedroom apartments, $800 each. When you add it up, let's say on a monthly basis, on an average, he brings in about $4,000, $4,500 a month. Now, the tax bracket that this gentleman is being placed in is so high, so you ask yourself then, aren't you allowed to be successful in your own country? Because it's not $1 million, but I'm just saying if you're taxing him 30-something% on the amount that he's bringing in, then he's going to try hide it, and then you have all the situations that we have now. And then you get the wild assessments at the end of the year. So my question through you, Madam Chair, to the Minister, how can we work on things like that? Because if you're saying, not say you, but the government, the people, the way that the system is set up, you're not allowed to be successful, then what are we creating? Because now there's a major gap where there's basically no middle class, there's only the upper class and the lower class, where I believe that if we collectively as Parliament and as government work together to amend certain things to make life easier, and I gave the example with the senior, but it's also the case with businesses. I know that there are different legislation, some by my colleague, MP Irian, in terms of profit tax, to reduce profit tax and so forth, that are in the pipeline. So my question isn't really geared towards that, but I would like to have the minister's thought or the ministry's thought on a scenario that I just lay out with, specifically with a senior, with the numbers that I just gave. I'll leave it there for now, Madam Chair, and I'll proceed once I get a response. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Doran. MP Roseberg, you have the floor.
Thank you, Chair Lady. Blessed afternoon to my colleagues and to the Minister of Finance and our support staff here today. My question is pretty much focused on also something that we received as Parliament, incoming document, and to go further into that. Yes, I agree with a new tax system, seeing the current tax system is pretty outdated. But what I would like to know through you, Madam Chair, is that in the incoming documents, and I'm not sure if the Ministry of Finance is also aware of that, we received documentation in regards to the current state of St. Martin, that St. Martin still carries a legacy of period during and after the abolition of slavery, in which land ownership, transfer, and registration were not always clearly established. And to this date, that's not the case, which comes with undivided estates and succession grounds, historical ownership structures dating back generations, ongoing legal procedures regarding family lands and claims. And then within that context, the current tax reforms in combination with possible future policy developments in the field of land and spatial planning can raise questions about the possible consequences for existing rights and ongoing legal processes. And that decision made today can have long-lasting impact on generations of family, of property, legal certainty, and historical ownership and structures. And therefore, the question is to know if this was looked into, and also in the part and the view of the historical sensitivity of land and inheritance issues on St. Martin, so that we won't have a problem in the future in regards to this matter. So if that can be answered. Thank you, Madam Chair. That's it for now.
Thank you, MP Roseberg. I now give the floor to MP Janssen. MP Janssen, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair Lady, and good afternoon. Good afternoon to my fellow colleagues, and good afternoon and welcome to the Minister, her support staff. Minister, I too would like to commend you on bringing these two laws forward here today. And I just wanted to add, maybe with the combination, I know that there is a movement also to have the law brought forward so that succession land can be divided. There's talk about at least 60% of the heirs agree, then the land can be divided, etc. When you look at this in combination with these two laws that you have brought forward, you can see where people can actually get the ownership of the land and they can hand it over to their children, their grandchildren, a lot easier. I think that what, as a government, I suggest that maybe government can look at now is having public service announcements to sensitize people to some of what you mentioned today, the importance of land ownership, so that people don't get a land and sell it, you know, and just have only foreign investments, so that they can invest locally, they can invest themselves, but keep the land in their families, keep the land in their possession, keep the land for their children and their grandchildren, and not that we make all of this possible just for people to sell out, you know, but that will have to be a mindset change or adaptation, and I think that will be important. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Janssen. MP Duran, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just have a follow-up question, and I want to clarify my point a little bit more. So I did give the example with a taxi driver, but just put it in perspective, I'm talking about people with multiple sources of income. So let's say, for instance, if somebody that works in a hotel, a maintenance man, retires, and then he decides to get a contract by another hotel, maybe for even minimum wage, it is also handled the same way in terms of the high tax bracket that they put individuals in. So I just want to clarify that I'm talking about persons with multiple streams of revenue, albeit small, they're being put in a high bracket. Thank you.
Thank you, MP Duran. MP Otley, oh, okay. MP Otley, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To the Honorable Minister of Finance, I must say, you know, I have been vocal on the way things have been going with this government, and it has seemed like I'm not seeing revenue-generating measures, and the only measures I've seen and heard about was taxation. So for you to come here today with these two laws, I must say this is in line with myself and my party. You speak of Dr. Claude Watty, and it would be remiss of me to mention my great-grandfather, Melford Hazel, who often preached God made birds and made more birds. He made human and make more human, but God ain't making no more land. Very important. When you know the history of stuff and people that would work in Santo Domingo, work in the United States back in the day and send their money piece by piece to acquire these lands for today, we have a lot of families that we call poor millionaires. What is that? Family that has hectares of land, but no way to transfer, cannot afford the tax, cannot develop, so they are forced to sell in order to see some sort of revenue. Madam Chair, through you, my colleague MP La Cruz mentioned a critical part. This needs to stay with the locals. If foreign investors want to buy, there should be a tax implemented. I also would like to repeat what my colleague just mentioned when it comes to a certain percent of family agreeing so that we can start to divide succession land. There is too many properties. There are too many properties in this country that are not developed, not used to its potential because family can't agree. There are property that we can use roads, property that we can develop for affordable housing, property that we can do so much for our country. Because when St. Martin was developed years and years ago, it was not developed with the vision of 30, 40, 50 years. It was now. I say this, look at our traffic situation. You have a 2-lane, and at each end of the lane there's houses, businesses, so there's no room for modification or to add another 2 lanes. And I say this, that most of the land in St. Martin was private and bought by government so that roads can go through. Cahill, Betty Estate, and you name it. So it's time that we allow our inheritance to be passed on in a correct manner. I am a proponent of what you are proposing. I will look into it definitely, thoroughly. And I can say here, though, through you, Madam Chair, to the Minister of Finance, I listened to your speech and I listened to your presentation about locals, and I pray that it is not a hidden agenda. And I pray that you can prove this by us looking into exactly what my colleague mentioned, securing that foreign investors would still need to pay some sort of percentage. Let us protect our people. And once you can assure that, you 95% have my support. I always got to leave that 5%. You know me. 95% have my support once you can assure that. But definitely this is a way to go. I know that we also were in discussions when we were in government of doing it, but nonetheless, you brought it. So let's see what happens when it comes to the floor of Parliament. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP Otley. Members of Parliament, thank you for your comments and your few questions to the Minister on this draft national ordinance, the one ordinance that repeals 2 tax ordinances. Minister, I join my colleagues in thanking you for the presentation regarding the tax repeals itself, quite short, but a narrative behind why I think is extremely important. The explanation why these 2, I think it's important also from a more general perspective than just the repeal of these 2 taxes. So, Minister, this law from my side will not be held back with any questions, unlike my questions pertaining to the draft formal tax law and the changes thereto, and my questions about the timing of those particular changes in the context of the overall tax reform being pursued by your ministry. That's the other law that we have been dealing with, and I look forward to answers to my questions on that law. However, Minister, this law being what it is, and again, I could not agree more with my colleagues in terms, and yourself in terms of, one, the timeliness and the need for it to happen. And I asked myself, now what? What are the next steps? And Minister, I asked this question with a very particular view in mind. We have the ongoing tax reform in collaboration with the TWO. Let me pause there a moment and indicate that in the last report of the TWO, it states dat onder de measure het wetgevingspakket voor het belastinghervormingskader, zogenaamd standpuntnota, wordt aangenomen. And then it states, it's stated in Dutch, I'll translate it in English one time. In 2023, originally, a position note with a few tax reforms, reform measures was made. The work on this package has been resumed and an intermediate product is expected soon. This is in the latest TWO report. Now, the Parliament of St. Martin, back in 2021, so after the country package was established, we of the Parliament received a presentation of the government at the time in 2021 regarding not only tax reform, but some very specific items of tax reform and numbers. So reducing profit tax from this to this, eliminating this tax, putting in this tax. It speaks about sin tax, and I mean on and on. And for the record, I want to mention these documents here so that, Minister, if they are not part of your administration, that they can be forwarded. We have IS 021 of the year 2021, September 2021. The Parliament was presented with a package of tax reform, very specific items, profit tax, income tax, turnover tax, I mean, you name them. Vision of this government broken down in items of tax reform and a timeline. What come in when, what items come in when. So what I would like to know is the Mercelina Council of Ministers' decision on tax reform. Updating, maybe including some of it, maybe not, of these that are presently in Parliament. I recognize also from the Council of Advice, by the way, the Council of Advice's advice on this draft law is, it could not have happened sooner. So the Council of Advice is in agreement with these draft measures being taken here. So I would like to see that tax reform. I would also, and in it, sorry, this is the point on the Council of Advice, in it, the reference is made that some of the proposals that were made to retract are now being looked at by this government, amongst which the dividend withholding tax. That is also one of those old taxes. This government put it forward to Parliament with the suggestion, let us continue with it. I have expressed my opinion about it. And then we also have the so-called facility tax legislation. And there too, the government has decided not just to throw this out, not just to, so what we call the tax holiday for the clarity of everyone, but to see how this can be used as a modernized investment tool, if I phrase it correctly. If not, I stand to be corrected. And then, Minister, I don't know what in terms of resources you would need, but I do not believe that we can continue discussing tax reform, discussing a new tax system, unless we have some kind of data as to where things stand right now with our tax administration. What do we know? Not about persons, mind you, but about numbers. I mean, how many people file? How many do not file? How many crib numbers do we have? What is the discrepancy between persons filed and who all we think should be filing? Those kind of numbers. We cannot be planning tax reform without knowing what our starting position is. What is a so-called null mating in the case of taxes. And I say this, why do I say what do you need in terms of resources? Because it is not the first time I asked this question, Minister, and you have indicated it is extremely difficult, if not impossible, to get it. Somehow we should be able to do that. And my question to you is, how do you think we can? How do you think we can get that information? And then, Minister, on a slight side note, really, talking about cadastre, and cadastre falls under the Minister of Finance. Is there any overview? Is the cadastre office able to provide us with an overview of land entitlement on St. Martin, or not land ownership rather? You know, what parts of our land is domain and what is privately owned? If they would have that kind of information to provide, I don't know if they can, but if they can, that would be interesting given the discussion here taking place. Minister, again, I want to thank you for your presentation. And as I mentioned, for me, it's not only about the retraction of these two laws, it's about what is presented behind it for the reason, because the retraction was on the books for a while. Should it be, should it not be? And, you know, keeping our fingers crossed that no person will come up with a bright idea to basically apply it. And, but I think the story and the vision behind the retraction as presented by you is what, to me, is, as they would say in Dutch, you know, music to the ears. So so Minister, just my few additions, and I look at you, Minister, to see at this stage how you can proceed with the answers to questions posed, or any comment, or your reaction to any comment made by members of Parliament. Minister, I give the floor to you.
Madam Chair, thank you for the opportunity to respond. I would like to ask if I can get 45 minutes to return to answer the questions posed by the members of Parliament.
Members of Parliament, okay, and now I was going to ask what you thought, because I picked up something of what you thought, but I was going to ask you what you thought about the minister's proposal, but I know why the minister is suggesting to return this afternoon, because if she does not, we are not able to continue this discussion next week for sure due to absence. So that's what we have before us. So then we will adjourn for the 45 minutes. I look, and if depending on the, I think the members are kind of indicating, let's do that. Let's at least get a minister back in 45 minutes with as many answers as she can give at this moment. This meeting is adjourned until 3:15, 3:15 this afternoon. Meeting adjourned. But before I adjourn, what I'm going to do, I'm going to adjourn for 3 minutes. Okay, before I adjourn for 3:15 or 20, MP Lacruz, you want to make a comment on the? Yes, oh, sure. Go right ahead. Oh, you have a proposal.
Yeah. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady. Madam Chair Lady, seeing the questions that were asked to the minister, the question is, does the minister think that she could answer all those questions in the 45 minutes? Because if we are going to adjourn for 45 minutes and then not get all the answers back and still have to come back at the next time, for me, that makes absolutely no sense. So if the minister believes that she could answer all the questions in 45 minutes, then I am for the proposal. If not, then I think, because we will still have to come back at another time to finalize the meeting. Thank you, Madam Chair Lady.
Thank you. Thank you, MP Lacruz. Of course, the minister would have to respond to that, but I can mention in connection with that proposal that the minister can come back and give what she has and then provide the rest of the answers in writing, because this being a draft law, all of the answers will have to be part of the report on this draft law. So we can do that, get some, or we... The members seem to be in favor, Minister, of you providing all of the answers in writing. Not all of them are in favor of that. Minister, we're going to adjourn until 3:15. The minister's going to come back and we're going to see what she's able to answer. That's what we're going to do. Meeting adjourned until 3:15. Members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon and welcome back. We are handling the draft national ordinance as submitted by the government, specifically by the Minister of Finance, that seeks to retract two ordinances, two tax ordinances, one on the land tax and one on the inheritance tax. So the proposal before us from the government of St. Martin is to retract these existing, in other words, on the books taxes. The Minister of Finance has made a presentation on the reasoning and vision behind this retraction, after which members of Parliament were able to ask questions, give their comments, and we had an adjournment to allow the minister to respond to these questions. So I now invite the Minister of Finance, Ms. Marinka Gums, to take the floor. Minister, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to thank the members of Parliament for their positive responses to the retraction of both the land tax and the inheritance tax. I am pleased to note the broad alignment on this matter, which will clearly benefit the people of St. Martin. I will now proceed to address the statements and questions raised by the members of Parliament. Starting with MP La Cruz. Through you, Madam Chair, I thank MP La Cruz for his clear support on the retraction of both the land and inheritance tax. With respect to the email referenced, I will need to review the matter further and will respond accordingly. I also appreciate the suggestion regarding the taxation of foreign nationals upon the sale of land. This could indeed be a positive initiative and would demonstrate our commitment to preserving land ownership for locals. Such considerations can be examined within the context of broader tax reforms, including matters such as a villa tax. However, as it relates to the legislation currently before Parliament concerning the abolishing of the land tax and the inheritance tax, my position remains unchanged. MP Waver, I want to thank you, through you, Madam Chair. While you did not have a question or no questions pertaining to this abolishing of land and inheritance tax, I want to acknowledge your support towards the abolishing of both the land and inheritance tax. Thank you. MP La Vega, through you, Madam Chair, I want to thank the Honorable MP for his support to the retraction of both land and inheritance tax. While he acknowledged that most of the questions were answered, I thank him for repeating them still, as it is important to reiterate the reasoning for this retraction and importance of it. His first question, the minister mentioned that this law is about legal certainty. What is formal repeal, or why is formal repeal necessary if the taxes are not enforced? Through you, Madam Chair, because leaving dormant taxes on the books creates uncertainty. A future administration could activate them without any broad policy debate. Formal repeal removes ambiguity and guarantees long-term predictability for families and investors. Madam Chair, can I ask for 2 minutes?
Oh, definitely. I hereby adjourn for 3 minutes. Meeting adjourned.
Thank you.
Members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, Minister of Finance and your support staff, welcome back. And Minister, you may continue with your answers to the questions by members of Parliament.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I continue with questions posed by MP Labega. How does the minister expect the legislation to impact the real estate market in St. Martin? Through you, Madam Chair, by removing the possibility of annual land taxation and inheritance burdens, we strengthen long-term confidence in property ownership. This encourages development, renovation, and generational retention of land while making St. Martin more attractive to investors and returning diaspora. Following question. Some may argue that inheritance tax promotes redistribution. Why does the minister believe abolition is the fairer approach? Through you, Madam Chair, inheritance tax effectively taxes assets that were already taxed during the lifetime of the deceased. In our context, wealth is often tied up in land and family businesses. Abolishing the tax protects middle-class families and prevents forced sales, which aligns with fairness and economic stability. Following question. How does abolishing two taxes align with responsible fiscal management? Through you, Madam Chair, responsible fiscal management is not about maintaining unused instruments. It is about focusing on efficient and enforceable revenue sources. Our strategy emphasizes compliance, modernization of existing taxes, and economic growth, rather than rhetoric or theoretical taxes that were never viable. Following question. Can the minister elaborate on how this reform benefits families holding succession land? Through you, Madam Chair, succession land is often land-rich but cash-poor. An annual land tax or inheritance levy could create financial pressure, leading to forced sales. By abolishing these taxes, we safeguard ancestral land and provide stability for future generations. Following question. How does this reform contribute to St. Martin's ambition to become a more investor-friendly jurisdiction? Through you, Madam Chair, investors value predictability, knowing that land will not be subject to annual taxation and that inheritance transfers will not be taxed provides long-term certainty. That clarity enhances competitiveness and strengthens our positioning in the region. Following question. The minister referred to this as a step within broader tax reform. What comes next? Through you, Madam Chair, this initiative removes outdated and symbolic burdens. The next steps involve modernizing and improving compliance in existing revenue streams, refining business taxes, and continuing our structured reform process in phases. And last question. The minister emphasized the cultural and historical dimension of land. Why was it important to frame this legislation in that context? Through you, Madam Chair, because taxation policy is not only economic, it is also social. Land in St. Martin represents identity, legacy, and stability. Aligning our legislation with our lived cultural reality strengthens public trust and ensures that our fiscal framework reflects who we are as a people. I move on to the question posed by MP York. And Madam Chair, through you, I want to acknowledge MP York's full support for the retraction of the inheritance tax and his reservations regarding the retraction of the land tax. On this point, we will have to agree to disagree, respectfully, as I am fully in support of retracting both taxes. Both measures have a significant impact on our local population and, as outlined in my presentation, are deeply rooted in our historical context. I do agree that we must continue to explore ways to better support our local population, and in that regard, the matter raised by MP La Cruz concerning the sale of property is one I do intend to examine further. However, I remain firm in my position on the retraction of both the inheritance tax and the land tax. As it pertains to the said, through you, Madam Chair, the government notes that the two tax laws have never been executed and therefore have not affected households, businesses, land use, or government revenues. Their repeal is therefore not expected to have any measurable social economic impact. Therefore, my opinion is that the referral to the said was not necessary. Madam Chair, I move on to questions posed by MP Duran. And through you, Madam Chair, I would like to thank the Member of Parliament for the additional question regarding pensioners. I really want to thank you. While this is not the specific topic under discussion today, pensioners are indeed dear to my heart, and since taking office, I have been actively working on matters that affect them. Let me be clear, Madam Chair. I believe in fair taxation. Everyone should contribute their fair share under the law, and as public officials, it is our duty to ensure that the public is properly informed. Pension payout is not subject to double taxation. During one's working years, the pension contribution that is withheld is not taxed. The taxation occurs when the pension benefit is paid out. That is the first moment it becomes taxable income. I have publicly addressed the issue concerning pensioners who receive multiple sources of income. Individually, these income streams may fall below the taxable threshold. However, when combined at the time of filing the annual income tax return, the total income may place the individual within a taxable bracket. This does not mean they are being taxed incorrectly. It simply reflects that once aggregated, their total income falls within the bracket prescribed by law. Recognizing the challenges this can create, I recently met with APS to discuss practical solutions. We are exploring these, and more information on this will be forthcoming to the public. In addition, as I have stated since taking office, I am taking the necessary steps to address the treatment of AOV as taxable income. The matter is currently being reviewed. Adjustments in this area would provide some relief, particularly for individuals who rely primarily on AOV and are compelled to seek supplementary employment in order to meet their basic living expenses. Allow me to clarify, Madam Chair, my statement. I am taking the necessary steps to address the treatment of having AOV as a non-taxable income. I now move on to questions posed by MP Roseberg. Through you, Madam Chair, I want to thank MP Roseberg for her statement and the proposed legislation for the abolition of the inheritance tax and land tax will have no impact on the issues raised by MP Roseberg. However, I acknowledge the importance of these matters as it relates to land and the transfer and ownership of it. I move on to the statement by MP Janssen. Through you, Madam Chair, I want to thank MP Janssen for her comment and acknowledge her intention that the government unfortunately does not have the authority over the sale of privately owned land. However, through the abolition of the existing legislation, we aim to create conditions that reduce the necessity for individuals to sell their land. As a government, we will continue to empower and educate the population on the importance of retaining ownership rather than selling. I now move on to MP Otley. Through you, Madam Chair, I would like to thank MP Otley for his support on this matter. As previously mentioned, we will further explore the suggestions put forward by both him and MP La Cruz. And lastly, as it pertains to the statements and or questions posed by you, Madam Chair, through you, I want to thank you for outlining the presentations of the tax reform by the previous government and suggestions on the way forward. It is obvious that the Honorable MP has thoroughly taken notice of the advice from the Council of Advice supporting the legislation I brought forth to Parliament today. I agree that the vision on the items of the tax reform within a clear timeline has to be formally established by the Cabinet Marcelina II. This is the way forward to a tax reform to be implemented with real impact benefiting our people and the interests of our country. With regard to obtaining the data, we are working through the TWO with a data analyst who is assigned to attract the needed data out of our systems. I will come back to Parliament for the answering of the questions posed by the Honorable MP during the Central Committee meeting on a draft national ordinance herziening formeel belastingrecht, which answers will provide more clarity on the tax reform and the way forward as requested by MP Westcott. Regarding the request on the percentages of domain land versus the percentages of private land ownership, I will request the cadastre if they have such a registry or can compile this data. This brings me to the end of answering the questions. I thank all the honorable members of Parliament for their support and look forward to having both the inheritance tax and the land tax abolished for the people of St. Martin. Thank you.
Thank you, Minister of Finance, Ms. Marinka Gums. Members of Parliament, is there anything else you wish to address on this matter before I close the Central Committee and proceed to make up a report on it? I see we have MP York. MP York, you have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair. To start off with, I only asked one question. I didn't get an answer on my one question. This question was posed in a prior meeting as well, and at this point, I'm starting to get the feeling that it's purposely not being answered. The question I posed was, I had, through you, Madam Chair, a healthy back and forth with the Minister on the thought of land tax for foreign investors. The Minister was going to look into it, and I asked the Minister what were the findings of that research, because she's here today to push through the CC in order to go to the public meeting for the abolishment of land tax. And I asked a simple question: have other options been explored besides simple abolishment of the land tax? And I've repeatedly not gotten the answer on that. Aside from that, Madam Chair, there's a picture, as much as I agree with some of the realities of what land tax, once enforced, would have on our people. The picture that's painted in the presentation paints the picture of if it's enforced. The reality is it has not been enforced. It's not enforced. And to use the words of the Minister in the lived culture reality is that it's not a problem right now. All right? So my point is, through you, Madam Chair, if it's not a problem right now, why don't we adjust it that we can actually benefit from it? Because right now, abolishing it, I only see one side of society benefiting from it, and it's not the people of St. Martin. The reason I'm saying that, and I'm not saying that lightly, the Minister said, through you, Madam Chair, is, if I understood it correctly, that she would look into, the Minister be looking into transfer tax for foreign investors, if I understood that correctly. There are so many loopholes around that, if that's what the Minister meant. Right now, and for the last couple decades, people come to St. Martin, investors come to St. Martin, and they benefit after St. Martin, and one could say the benefit does not go both ways. This law, if amended and tweaked in the right way, can actually push the pendulum in St. Martin's gain. And right now, especially if you look at the Investors Index, St. Martin is in the top how many countries in the Caribbean when it comes to Investors Index. So we're not in a position where we have to do things to attract investors. Investors need us more than we need investors right now. And I don't see where the total abolishment of land tax, when we could actually adjust it that those that come to St. Martin contribute to St. Martin. I don't see how not effectively exploring that idea pushes us in the right direction, and that abolishing this is just the only option in what we can do, because the minister's she's pushing forward regardless. I don't get the feeling that the minister came to hear other ideas, but more, no matter what you guys say, I'm doing it regardless. That's the feeling I'm getting after the answers from the minister. And I'm here for open dialogue on the topic. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP York. I don't see any other member the need to address this topic at this time. Minister, do you have a response for MP York? Then I invite you to provide that at this time.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to respond to what I honestly believe was a response to MP York's question. We don't have a full house here today, Madam Chair. Nevertheless, based on the MPs that are present, it is clear that, in my opinion, the only MP that is against the abolition of land tax is MP York. You know, in my opinion, once again, I stand by that position of abolishing land tax and inheritance tax, because I believe it's in the best interest for the people of St. Martin. In looking at foreign investors and what they are able to gain from St. Martin, yes or no, we are exploring other means in which they can contribute to the coffers of St. Martin for sure. And we are looking at items such as, for example, the villa tax. I mentioned earlier with the recommendation from MPs La Cruz and MP Otley that those will be taken into consideration as well. But as it stands, for my reason for being here today is simply to abolish, or to ask the honorable members of parliament to abolish land tax and inheritance tax. And other avenues for revenue generating will be explored and will be communicated accordingly to the members of parliament. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Minister Gums. I see MP York has a reaction to that. MP York.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank the Minister for her answer. And I don't know if it's accurate, but if it's accurate that I'm the only one, according to the Minister, against it, then so be it. But at the end of the day, Madam Chair, I still don't have the answer to my question. We're going to make a choice in abolishing this. I would like that the other options are also explored, and I at least get a feedback on what the outcomes were, or would be, if we were to explore other options. Attached to that, Madam Chair, you yourself asked a very, very good question, and that's a question that a prior tax debate, dividends tax debate to be exactly, what is we're busy with singular taxations, in this case, inheritance tax, land tax, etc. And the Minister states it's part of the broader picture, and I understand that totally. And I understand it's step for step, and you can't do everything one time. But the one thing that we can do to start off is understand where are we heading, right? And if we move left, we move right. That's part of the puzzle to get to to whichever point in the end. And I have yet to receive the answer, and I've asked that before. What is the vision? What is the goal? I've asked before. Other countries have a particular percentage of taxation. St. Martin has a particular percentage. Where are we heading to? What is the goal? I would like to know that before willy-nilly in abolishing this and adding that and amending this. And I say willy-nilly, I say it lightly, but I have not received a total vision from the Minister as yet, and maybe she has it, but she hasn't shared it with us as yet, as it pertains to tax reform for St. Martin. And my questions that I'm asking pertaining to land tax have all the avenues been explored? And if so, what were the findings? I don't find I'm asking a crazy question when I'm asking that. So I'm just asking for data and information. And if the Minister doesn't have it, she doesn't have it. But I would like the minister to look into it, and she would take the time to do so. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP York. Minister, is there any further reaction that you have to MP York's comments?
Madam, I want to state the following. Tax reform started, or the whole notion of tax reform started even before I became. So there are a lot of components to tax reform, and yes, I know the members of parliament, including the chair, would like to see, because of the questions that that was asked today again, to see the holistic picture. However, something has to be done, Madam Chair, through you to MP York. It is clear that we can, and I as minister cannot come with a total picture in one setting, or trying to do anything where taxes are concerned or tax reform is concerned in one setting. There are different laws, as MP Westcott outlined here today, with different IS numbers that were presented in past governments. These are matters that will be looked into, and you will get the clear picture in terms of what comes first, what comes next. And I think once I give that indication as to what the priorities are under the Marcelina II cabinet as it responds to tax reform, I think the picture would be then painted. But I don't agree that we sit back and absolutely nothing with tax reform or taxes in general. And if this is something as for me, easy tax, as it's not being used or there's no benefit, we're not getting anything in our coffers for these two, then why not and abolish them? That is my perspective. Now, I do understand, and like I stated in my earlier answer, Madam Chair, through you to MP York, that we may be of a different opinion, but I just can't, I don't agree, I really don't agree that with land, and especially succession land, that, you know, it really behooves me that the Madam Chair, through you, don't believe that this would have any benefit to the local people of St. Martin. And so, like I stated, I am here today to have that done and ask that the members of parliament look into agreeing with abolishing land and inheritance taxes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Minister Gums, MP York, I'll allow you to make some concluding statements on this aspect, that the discussion, the interaction between yourself and the minister. MP York, you have the floor.
Madam Chair, if there's anyone passionate about the issues of succession land here on the island, I'll be one of those at the top of that list. I'm actually, as already made public, working on an amendment for our legislation for succession land for almost a year now. So when it comes to the troubles and the ills and the quells of succession land, trust me, Madam Chair, Minister, I know all about it. But that's not my point. What I get as main motivation is we cannot do nothing because we have to do something about this now. The urgency, I don't get it. It's something that's not enforced. The only person that could enforce it is the sitting government. If they say we're not going to enforce it for while we're here, while we work on other things, I don't see what's the issue in that. Not doing anything, Madam Chair, we have a committee of finance where we can put a work group together, a tax reform. We could make a topical committee for tax reform, as you've stated in the past. Not about tax reform, but about topical committees. And we could actively work along with the minister or sit through meetings with the minister where she can in depth, it may be closed door or not, what the broader picture is for tax reform. Now, tax reform, I'm not saying that as the minister has to bring everything in one setting as it pertains to legislations and amendments. I'm not saying that at all. I'm also realistic where that is concerned, but asking for a vision about where we are going, I don't think that's a crazy request. We need to have a departure point, and yes, I understand it was being worked on before she was there. I totally understand that, Madam Chair, but the fact is the minister is there now, and I would like to know what is the vision of this minister, this coalition, this government, seeing that I live in this country as well, and I would like to know where we are going. I'm not trying to be difficult at all, but I've been very consistent in what I've been saying and what I've been requesting. When the minister was here for dividends tax, I asked averagely the same exact questions then, and months later, I still don't have any answers to my questions. And a simple question being, Minister, did you look into what we discussed the last time? And if you did, what were the findings? I don't see what's so hard in answering that. I don't know how I could ask the question being politically correct. So, Minister, I'm not against you and your staff's initiatives. I'm for inheritance tax abolishment. I understand the reasons for it. But as you said, through you, Madam Chair, in closing, the minister said we are not getting anything out of these legislations as currently constituted. And I am of the belief, if I'm the only one that believes that, then so be it. There are opportunities to where we can get something out of them, whether it be land tax or any other tax. So all I'm asking for is for the research to be done. And if the minister comes and she says, MP York, I looked into it, these were the facts, X, Y, Z, this is why I chose to go a different direction, and so be it. But I'm not getting that from the minister as yet either. And that's all I'm asking for. So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP York. Minister, before I sort of conclude this session, I would just ask of you, you referred to the issue of collecting data and a data analyst having been employed to do that. If for your responses, your official responses, if you can give a little more indication as to what, how, when with respect to that. And my references to the different documents here at Parliament are actually decisions by the government at a time regarding taxes. So it's all about tax reform, not necessarily tax laws, but different taxes, yes. So if you could also include for the next, or in your answers, if you also can include the matter of the question about your particular vision on taxes, et cetera, as they relate to decisions taken by the COMs in the past. So, Minister and members of Parliament, of course, if there are no further comments in this Central Committee meeting, then a final report, so-called eindverslag, will be sent to the government on this draft national ordinance for further handling. So, with that meaning that, of course, the government then too would respond officially to that report, and that will be our basis to then have the public meeting on this draft law. So at this time, I want to thank all of you members of Parliament. I want to thank the Honorable Minister of Finance and her support staff for their presence here today. And when I finish, I'll give MP York the opportunity to say something. I guess that is his desire. Nevertheless, let me continue. Yes, to thank you, Minister, and your support staff for being here and presenting this law, again, that seeks to retract, abolish the existing laws on land tax and inheritance tax. MP York, I'll allow you, before actually closing the meeting, to make a comment or, yes, MP York.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Madam Chair, I find it, I'm looking for a politically correct word to say it, but for me to ask the same question 5 times, and for the following speaker after me to just conclude the meeting and say we're going to an end report, what is the sense of attending a meeting if you're coming to ask questions to get answers? What I'm asking is not crazy. It's come time that people that come to St. Martin to benefit on St. Martin pay for that benefit. And all I'm asking is, before the government takes away the tools that we have left to do such that it is researched, it seems like it's a foreign thing to say or to ask for. The minister said only MP York is against the abolishing of the land tax. But according to me, MP Otley stated we have to look into foreign investments and how we could make money off of that. MP Duran said the same thing. I said the same thing. In another meeting, MP Peterson said the same thing. I am not the only one. Maybe I'm the only one speaking on it now, weirdly. But with that being said, I'm asking a question, and before going into a public meeting where people are going to say, oh, York is grandstanding, I would like to have the answer to the question before we conclude this meeting, because I have a right to an answer that I've been asking for prior to this meeting even being held. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, MP York. MP York, I'll try to paraphrase what I understood the minister to say in answer to your question here in this meeting, that she will not entertain the idea or the notion to halt this process to do any other research or analysis as you are requesting. With that, the minister has answered the question you posed. Not that you necessarily have to agree with her answer. That is what the minister said and explained twice after her initial answer. So, as far as I am concerned, another speaker after you decide to close the meeting? No. The chair lady decided, based on the lack of further reaction from members of parliament, that this meeting of the Central Committee will be closed with a final report. So I continue and thank the Minister of Finance and your support staff for your presence here today and for providing the necessary information. Members of Parliament, ladies and gentlemen, we have come to the end of this Central Committee meeting. I thank you all for your participation, and this meeting is hereby closed.